She's Grace. She's Queen of 50 States. I used that little song as an intro to, what did we just do? Maybe it was a podcast for Revisited. Sang that at the beginning. It's been in my head for weeks. I don't even know if it's a full song. I know it's for the United States pageant, but Nancy Drew's helped me out. Was that song written for the movie Miss Congeniality? Because I'm obsessed with Miss Congeniality. It's so good. Is it custom for me to sing a song at the beginning of an episode of Full of It? Well, I suppose. Can you say something is customary when you've had barely any episodes of something? You know, clearly I love doing this because I've done so many. This is episode 7, Full of It, Full of Shit. So I'll get to... There's something I'm going to sort of sow the seeds in people's mind. I'm going to get to that at the end of the episode. Something exciting that I'd like to tease. But I'm not going to spoil it now, so maybe that will persuade someone to listen to the whole thing. But yes, this is, a podcast. This is something that this particular episode is something I've wanted to do for like a week. It came to me suddenly, all of a sudden. The topic of what I'm about to discuss comes back to me time and time again. It is something that I've been fascinated with since, I guess, James Cameron's movie came out. It's Titanic. It is a ship. Was a ship. Is a ship. I suppose you could say it is. People own shipwrecks, apparently. I was researching the Britannic, which was Titanic's sister ship. Britannic, incidentally, is the largest ocean liner on the seabed. And apparently someone owns that shipwreck. I don't know why you'd want to own a shipwreck, because people are going to go and see it, regardless. Can you stop people from diving a shipwreck? I suppose Britannic is in quite a shallow body of water, so perhaps, maybe it's easier for people to go to it and therefore that would be illegal. I don't know. Anyway, so the theme is Titanic. As is customary, let's just see if this is still recording. Yes, I'm doing so well. The phone is precariously balanced on an old box. It's a box full of boxes. Well, not anymore, I'm wearing them. But anyway, I've got my beverage here ready to start. I'm really going to sink my teeth into this. Today's beverage is from Lidl. It's called Polish Taste Cherry and Apple Juice Drink. It's disgusting. It should not be called Polish Taste. It should be called Tastes Like a Pigeon's Afterbirth. It's sort of a bit like Play-Doh. It's not great. I would not recommend it. There was another one I saw that was like pineapple and banana juice drink. Okay, well, try and get juice out of a banana, please. Someone's trying to pull a Padge. That's not good. Someone commented on a video of ours and said, are we using a different... Does pull the Padge mean something else? Are we changing the definition of it? In Novympia Heights, Charmaine and I, pull a Padge and pull a stunt, they're sort of interchangeable. We don't really know what we're talking about. We are moronic. That's a great name for a ship, RMS Moronic. I would captain that. All right, okay, so let's get into it. So, Titanic is one of those things that everyone knows something about. I am a minefield of useless information about Titanic. I know so much trivia. I have, books, or I used to anyway. I don't even know. We went to an exhibition once and I was younger, and I really regret... I was only sort of 11, and I really regret not just spending hours in there. It was in London. It was a huge exhibition, and they had artefacts and sort of replica sets and stuff. And I really regret not spending longer in there. But, you're young and foolish. And I got loads of books from that. And I am absolutely, when I die, which I don't think I've got long left, I would like my tombstone to just be emblazoned with Wikipedia articles, because I am always on Wikipedia. I think it's the most invaluable thing that people have ever created. It's so entertaining for me. I'll just sit there hours and hours. I'm one of those people that will read something, missing people. I've done a whole thing on that. Then you'll you'll find something else and you'll click on that and you'll be endlessly clicking and reading stuff. And does any of it go in? Probably not, but it's fascinating. It's one of the highest forms of entertainment, I find. So I have read up on Titanic so many times, absolutely fascinated. Now, in this podcast, I will be discussing Titanic. I will be talking about the movie and, related folklore, etc., etc. So get yourself a beverage and really sort of knuckle down, because this is going to be great. So let's go. Let's cast our minds back. It's been 84 years. Well, if you thought I wasn't going to whip that line out in this, then you're out of your mind. My family has been obsessed with Titanic for a very long time. My aunt, I've got an aunt. Her name's Alison, but for some reason I call her Midge. I'm not really sure where that came from, that name. But anyway, that's Midge. Shout out, Midge. And my cousin, her daughter Eve. Now, they love Titanic. I think it's their favourite movie. You know, my brother got Titanic on VHS for Christmas, and I wore that shit out. I watched it over and over again. Couldn't go to the movie theatre when that movie came out. Came out in 97, so I would have been 6 years old. Or not even born if you go by the 17 years old sort of, you know, storyline that I sometimes whip out. But anyway, I was 6 years old. It's a 12. You can't go and see it. That was before, in the United Kingdom, the age certificates are, that U is the first, you know, infants and shitters can go and see that. PG, I think kids, you know, if anyone could go and see that of any age as well. At 12, you obviously had to be 12. But now I believe it's a 12A, which means you can go and see it, but you do have to be accompanied by an adult, which at the time did not exist. So I did not see this movie for a while. On VHS, I did watch it. I remember watching it with my family. We all watched it at Christmas, I think, when it first came out on VHS. And that was the first time I saw it. Now, you can weigh up the, you know, appropriateness of letting a 6-year-old watch Titanic, I suppose. Can a 6-year-old even really appreciate what they're seeing, you know, in terms of how harrowing that movie is? I don't know. Probably not. I can remember several things about watching it. I can remember the part where the ship is really quite angled. It really is sinking, and it's got its whole ass up in the air, as Mr. What is his name? Mr. Modine says at the beginning of the film. It's got its big ass sticking up in the air. So it's up in the air, and the plates. It's the shot where the plates fall out of that sort of big sideboard and smash all over the floor. And I can just remember my mother. Now, my mother is northern, she's from Manchester, as is my grandmother, and I can remember my mother just turning and saying, "Oh, that lovely crockery." Just the amount of people dying, and she was concerned. Oh, that lovely plates. And this is the best. This is the most, like, if people wonder, you know, why people really either appreciate British humour or don't get it, I think this just sums it up. The scene where Kate Winslet, Rose, is trying to rescue Jack, who is handcuffed to that pole, that big sort of, you know, tube thing, pipe, I suppose you might say. She's just got into the water. It's got up to her, like, neck, and she's, you know, trying to wade through this water in that bloody coat. And everyone it's such a nerve-wracking moment. I probably made an excuse and left and went, you know, to have a phantom, you know, wee or something, just so I can get it, you know, pretend that I wasn't leaving because I was scared. I did that with the witches as well. I always used to go and, you know, pretend I had diarrhea just because I couldn't watch the scene, you know, where she comes, Witches of England, that scene, couldn't watch it. Anyway, so she's in the water, Rose, and everyone is so tense, and my grandmother just says, "Do you know, I've never liked swimming." I absolutely can picture her now sitting there. She passed away a few years ago, and I had to kind of think of some anecdotes for my cousin who gave her eulogy, and I regret not mentioning that now. It only came to me afterwards, but my God, that was one of the funniest things ever. So it has been something that we have watched for many years. I don't know. It's a fascinating subject. I believe a lot of people are very interested in this. Ships in general, I do have a very deep-rooted interest in ships, and I don't know why. Is it because they are named? Is it because Wikipedia lists them as having a fate? That there is so much sort of folklore, even boring shitters, like, you know, the MV Oceanos, which was just a crappy cruise liner. Greek, I think it was, ocean liner. Okay, it fell. Are you still there? Right, it fell. I knew it would. Hang on a second. That's probably fine. We'll just do that. So, Yeah, it's, there's nothing particularly interesting about the ship, but there's actually a clip on YouTube of the ship sinking. Don't look at it now. Wait until we finish together, please. That's very rude. And the way that it was abandoned by its crew, and, everyone survived, but they showed the live sinking of this ship on the news. There's like a helicopter shot getting footage of it sinking. Fascinating. Just the way that ships are birthed and named, and there's all this hoopla around them, and then maybe that they are given a career, ships, and whether it's an commercial passenger liner, or the Britannic ended up as a hospital ship because of its time in history. It was during the First World War. Why is that a hospital ship is such a bizarre thing? I find that you would need a hospital ship, sort of, it's a very odd purpose for a ship to be a hospital. But anyway, the fact that their careers can change, that they can be bought out by a different company and then renamed, and then do they get scrapped? I find it bizarre that ships get scrapped. I think maybe because they're sometimes they become so costly to run that they are just purposeless. Something like the Costa Concordia, which was a famous ship that ran aground off the coast of Italy about 6 or so years ago, I think. That's a fascinating one. Went too close to some rocks. It, not unlike Titanic, there was a gash in the side of the ship. It started to list and it flooded and sort of didn't completely capsize, but it fell onto its side and a lot of people did die. But that was scrapped because when they salvaged it upright, the whole side of the ship was fucked up, and inside there's some incredible photos of the inside of this ship, and it is fucked up. So you can understand sometimes why they do get scrapped. But when a ship seemingly is perfectly fine, it's a wonder why they are scrapped. I mean, I don't know, bloody hell, I'm not a captain. I don't own ships. I could own a ship. I will own a ship. There is a fascinating ship. I'll get back to Titanic, don't worry, I've not even started yet. There is a fascinating ship that, if you've never heard of this, you read the shit out of this Wikipedia article, because I swear to dog, this is fascinating to me. It's is it Russian or Polish? It's called the Orlova. No, hang on a second, what is it called? Lyubov Orlova. I don't know how to pronounce the name of this. I'm pretty sure that's correct. I think it's like Lyubov Orlova, Orlova, rhymes with Nova, funnily enough. If you Google that, it'll correct you, however I've spelt that wrong. It was a ship that was a commercial passenger liner, very small ship, that became, I think, very expensive to run. Or no, what it was the company that owned this ship and chartered these passenger commercial voyages. I think they were in massive debt and they did not pay off this debt, and so therefore they sort of I don't know if they were bankrupt or whatever, but they lost this ship. Someone bought out this ship and I think they were going to scrap it, but it got loose. I think they were towing it. There was like a towboat, I think, was trying to move it, and it became loose, and so it sort of became adrift, this ship. I think people did not consider that it would really go that far. It wasn't that big a deal at the time, but it got lost. It was sighted a couple of times off of some coasts. The Sun ran an article because somehow people got the idea that this ship had rats on it. It was on its own. It was a ghost ship, essentially, just drifting through international waters. And some sort of storyline came about that there were cannibalistic rats on this ship, and that it was headed for the UK, or Europe anyway, which was completely debunked. I don't know where they got that story from. That's the Sun for you. But the last time anyone heard of this ship was a Coast Guard somewhere received a sort of distress signal from this ship, that is only sent out when a certain device or like a black box is exposed to water. So the general consensus is that the ship sank because obviously that distress signal would not have been sent out if it was still afloat. But that's a fascinating one. There's something about ships and I can't place my finger on it. Someone tell me what it is, why they're so fascinating. Diving shipwrecks is fascinating. Sinking ships are fascinating, the way that they sink. There's something about them that I just love. I love reading about them. So the reason that I am doing this, we watched Titanic the other day, Flola and I, but I've recently come about, every so often, like I said, I will start researching it again. There's nothing I love more than coming across a new Titanic fact or a new Titanic story. There's a lot of crap about it, you know. There's a lot of facts that everyone knows, maybe you don't know. There were 4 funnels on Titanic, or smokestacks, as they're referred to. I think they called them stackers in the day. And the reason that they had 4 on Titanic, and Titanic was part of a 3-ship fleet of sister ships called the Olympic class liners. And they were named Titanic, Olympic, and Britannic. I was at a quiz recently. It was dire. It was for someone that I knew, and she was like, oh, this is like a pub quiz, it's going to be really fun. Turned up and it was like a charity black tie thing, and I looked like an absolute, buffoon in what I was wearing. Anyway, one of the questions was, what was the name of Titanic's sister ships? Well, if I didn't have a Bridget Jones moment, I stood up, I said, this is what I've been waiting my whole career for. Watch me write down the name of these ships. Well, there were some very smart people there, so a lot of people knew. But I knew. There is a legend that Olympic and Titanic were sort of switched, that it was actually the Olympic that sank. But I think that's been debunked. I think it was like an insurance thing. They switched them and they knew Titanic would sink. There is a lot of folklore about that, but I think that's generally considered to be BS. But Titanic, I was talking about the smokestacks. It had 4. And the reason it had 4 when there were only 3 actually required because of the way that Titanic was constructed. And I imagine this was the same for Olympic and Britannic. They had 4 because the Cunard Line was the rival ship company. Now, Titanic was part of the White Star Line. Their rivals were Cunard, who were doing, these humongous ships. At the time, the ones that were the most famous were the Lusitania and the Mauretania. I think Rose in Titanic, she gets out of the car and one of her lines is, I don't know what all the fuss is about. It doesn't look any bigger than the Mauretania. Well, that was the rival one at the time. And because, the idea was that these ships were enormous and powerful and fast, they had to match the Cunard ships. Now, the Cunard ships all had 4 funnels because they needed them. Titanic only needed 3, but they added the last one so that it would look more powerful. It would look as beastly as the rival ships. And also, I think for design, they did it for sort of symmetry and so that it looked more seamless. The 4th funnel was not functional. It was used, I believe, for ventilation from some smoking, like first class smoking lounges, stuff like that. I think somewhere I read that they used it for storage as well, but you could actually go up into it, and there are photos of someone sticking their head out of this funnel. Now, whether or not that is what that is in that picture, I don't know. I think that might be subject to conjecture, but it is interesting nonetheless. I watched a documentary. It's a series, actually. It's on Netflix. I watched it the other day. It's one of those series where it's like, disasters caught on camera, trashy shit like that. Well, they had an episode about disasters at sea. They had to include Titanic. You just have to. I think to this day, Titanic is the worst, or, has the highest death toll for a peacetime ship, disaster, certainly. I think it has the highest. And I watched, they had to include a clip, obviously. But I thought this was so cheap, because if you're going to put something together, I think this was called Disaster Hour or something. I don't know what the show was called, piece of shit. But if you're going to, smack something together and include something that is so famous and has so much written about it, it's not difficult to get the facts right. And it was fairly insulting because they included clips of a shipwreck during the Titanic segment, which I don't even think were Titanic. It looked like there was a lot of light, so it was in a shallow body of water. This ship was a lot smaller. It was clearly not the ship. So they've just thrown some stock footage in there and expected people to be like, oh yeah. So that was lame. And also they said that Titanic's sister ships were called Olympic and Gigantic, which is also inaccurate. There were, I believe, some original plans to name Britannic Gigantic, but they never came into fruition. It was ultimately named Britannic. Britannic, subsequently, an interesting thing about Britannic is that the people who died in the Titanic disaster quite famously died because they were not in lifeboats. They either drowned or, froze, essentially. But the people that died in the Britannic disaster died because they were in lifeboats, which is quite horrifying because they were in lifeboats, but as the ship went nose down and the propellers stuck out, whereas Titanic's propellers probably had stopped by the time that it was sinking. I think they did stop the ship, to try and avoid it hitting the iceberg. Or they reversed it anyway. But Britannic's was still going, because I think Britannic sank because it went over a mine, and therefore they didn't know it was coming. It was all very quick, and the propellers were still going, and the propellers sucked some people into them, which is quite horrifying. There's some clips on YouTube of like a CGI real-time sinking of both Titanic and Britannic, and they're very interesting. The Britannic one is, I'm sure Titanic's probably the same. The Britannic video is overlaid with sort of, witness testimonials and stuff where they just describe these lifeboats being sucked into propellers. It's the most horrendous thing. So that is... what was I going to go on about? Why was I talking about Britannic? Britannic is the largest shipwreck on the ocean floor, which I find fascinating. It did not break in half. I think the way that it sank, it really did bend to the side, so a lot of that stress was not on it the way that Titanic was. And a lot of people argued that Titanic did not break in half, which I find ridiculous because there are witnesses, and again, you can see this on YouTube, there are witnesses who said, there is no argument to be had. I saw that fucking thing break in half. They were probably very old, and I'm sure they did not use the word fuck. But, I'm doing it for effect. They said, I saw it break in half, so I know it did. James Cameron has since revised how he believes Titanic sank, in terms of, the physics of it. He did a documentary for National Geographic, I think it was. Is that that's a magazine? No, Discovery Channel. Which one is it? I don't know. He did a documentary. It's like 100 years on, so probably 2012, I imagine, where he's put together a new CGI of how Titanic sank. If you've seen the movie Titanic, you'll be very familiar with the beginning of the film where they show elderly Rose a video of how it sank. And James Cameron's since revised this. I think that the problem with the movie Titanic and the actual, accuracy of the physicality of how that ship sank is it went nose down, but it was completely straight on. There was no tilting of the ship at all, which, given that the gash occurred on one side, you would imagine that it would sink quicker on one side. There would be a list, which they have, he's revised this, and in the new animation, it does sink slightly at a tilt, which affects how steep the gradient of the ship's arse was, and therefore how it broke and how it ultimately sank at the end. It wasn't completely vertical, because you'll remember in the movie when Rose and Jack are at the stern, it is completely at the back. They are completely at the back, and it is like upright, and it is sinking completely upright, which, it was not quite like that. It was sort of a lot more shallow, and it didn't completely go vertical. So that's fascinating to see James Cameron revise that. I think given how much of a perfectionist James Cameron is, I expect he sort of thinks back about Titanic and thinks, oh, bugger fuck, why did I not think about that? Anyway, it's a fascinating movie. I've recently been listening to a podcast, not a podcast, I suppose you can call it that because you just listen to it. It's a video on YouTube, and it is a talk given by Dr. Robert Ballard. Now, Dr. Robert Ballard is the man who found Titanic. He's a sort of marine, I don't know what field you could specifically say he is in. Marine something. I'm not a doctor, I don't know these things. But he is the man who discovered Titanic. Now, he says in this talk he's given, if you just YouTube Dr. Robert Ballard Titanic, it's like the first one that comes up. It's so interesting because he says that when he was entrusted with finding Titanic, which I believe had a sort of Navy government edge to it, he was entrusted with finding Titanic, but it was actually a cover, it was a ruse, much like when a film gets sent, in its reel to be at cinemas to be unpacked. They sometimes will give it a different name so people can't get hold of it, and this was a cover. He was actually trying to locate some nuclear bombs, like some nuclear weapons, which were on some sunken, I think it was submarines. So the Navy wanted to locate these nuclear weapons, because obviously just having nuclear weapons at the bottom of the sea is not ideal, I would imagine. But they did not want the Russians to know that they were finding these bombs. So what they did is they said, right, we'll do this, but we're gonna sort of paint this as you're looking for Titanic. That's what it's gonna be. Well, of course, he stumbled across Titanic. Didn't actually mean to, but he actually did find it, which is hilarious. And he said that the government were like, no, you weren't supposed to bloody find it. Oh, I loved that. What an anecdote that is. I didn't know that before. Like I said, when you find new things about Titanic, it's great. Titanic and Britannic both sank, as we know. So Britannic hit a mine. Olympic is the only one of the three that did not sink. It was scrapped eventually. Britannic became a hospital ship. I don't know what happened to Olympic. Did it also become a hospital ship? I know there's a photograph of, I think it is Olympic, and it is painted in dazzle camouflage. Now, this is bizarre to me. I don't believe ships still do this. Maybe it doesn't work anymore. Apparently, well, not apparently, because they did do it, ships were painted during the war in a certain kind of paint. It looks like a Kandinsky. It's a very abstract, like lines and, squares and shapes painted all over this ship. So that apparently they were not as easy to locate, with like a radar technology or something like that, which is fascinating. There are photos of Olympic covered in this dazzle camouflage. I think it's Olympic. But to think that they would paint an entire enormous ship, because these ships were huge. That's fascinating. I don't know if they still do that anymore. I would have thought no. I would have thought maybe the technology has got slightly better since 1912. But you don't know. The story of Titanic it's obviously fictional. I think the detail they went to, though, they went at great lengths to make it as plausible as possible. The stateroom that Rose and Cal and Rose's mother, incidentally, does remind me of my mother. My mother is very, fine things and ladies who lunch. Very that. I mean, she's not... Rose's mother was a massive bitch, so she's not that, but still. The stateroom that they stayed in that movie was... it was obviously a real room. It was a real stateroom on Titanic, but the person who had intended on staying in that room did not at the last minute. So there is no real record of anyone staying in that room, which is why it's plausible that these people could live there. The facts are, they're very sharp. He did his research. I mean, I don't know if James Cameron still has any sort of participation in Titanic-related activities, but I imagine he was probably studying this boat for years, even after that movie came out, just not something. So that is very fine attention to detail. They did that. Titanic is obviously riddled with mistakes. It's more like continuity errors and things like that. There is supposed to be a guy you can see getting into a lifeboat with a digital watch on. I've never bothered to look for that. And the stuff like, is there a shot of Jack at the bow sort of doing I'm the King of the World, and in the distance you can see some buildings or something when they're supposed to be in the middle of the ocean? There's one where there's a giant, one of those metal, I don't even know what they're called. It's like a big metal drum that's sort of, the sides of it cave in a bit, and they sort of wrapped rope around it. Not a davit, no, I don't know what they're called. They wrapped rope around it, the metal structures, and there's a guy falling down the ship as it is elevating, and the whole thing bends in half because it's made of rubber. I always thought that one in particular was the most offensive mistake, because it is so obvious to me. It really is quite visible on screen, and why they didn't cut that out, I don't know. But anyway, it's there. It is riddled with errors. I do not know how many times I've seen that movie. I can reel off quotes to you like there is no tomorrow. One of the greatest deleted scenes from that movie is when the ship has hit the iceberg. And that's obviously a very tense moment, because you know for the entire movie that part is going to happen, and you're waiting for it the whole time. You're never watching Titanic without there being a sense of unease, because you know what shit is going to go down. And when it hits the iceberg, and it's just gone past, there is a deleted scene where Molly Brown, played by Kathy Bates, is in sort of the dining room, and she's at dinner or something, and she just calls to a waiter with her drink, and she says, "Hey, Sonny, how about a little ice?" And then the iceberg goes behind in the background. It's hilarious. You can see why they cut it out, because that's a very pivotal, important moment, and, you know, you can't put a joke in there. I'm surprised they even filmed that, to be honest, because that would have really, I don't know. It's a very somber movie, but I'm surprised they even filmed that bit. So, yes, I did not go and see Titanic when it was re-released in 3D. Titanic was the highest grossing movie for a very long time, until Avatar surpassed it, which, in retrospect, is kind of weird, I think, that Avatar grossed so much money. Is it not kind of weird? Do people think about Avatar? Do people even consider it anymore? I know they're doing a sequel, probably another one after that. I know they've done an Avatar World somewhere. Is that like a Disney park, like Florida or something? Oh, is it like an Animal Kingdom they've done one? I don't know. I think people are not happy with that, the story of Avatar, because it's just Pocahontas dressed up. Pocahontas, and what's that other one? Is it Fern Gully? Just sort of dressed up. I don't think people really enjoyed Avatar as a movie. I guess it's the special effects that are so sort of groundbreaking. The fact that James Cameron had to create and invent technology before making that film, that's sort of next level. He lost the directing Oscar that year to his ex-wife, I believe, Catherine Bigelow, for The Hurt Locker, was it? Which, you know, you can argue artistically, but as a director who has to invent technology to make his film come to life, that's pretty impressive. I don't know how many people could say that they have done that. Although he must be, such an arsehole. Amy Poehler and Tina Fey were presenting, was it the Golden Globes? And I think it was because Catherine Bigelow had done a movie. Was it Zero Dark 30? Was it Catherine Bigelow? I think so. She said, "I haven't seen Zero Dark 30, but when it comes to torture, I trust the woman who spent 10 years married to James Cameron." Something like that. Anyway, absolute burn of the century. He must be such a nightmare to work with. I'll let you know when I have worked with him. So, I'd like to know, and Nancy Drew's people talk to me. I was going to say downstairs. Down in the comments, I'd like to know, what are people also as fascinated with Titanic as I am? Please let me know some interesting tidbits. If you have like a little gem of information that you don't think I would have read before, that you heard from maybe your great nan, then let me know. I'm always fascinated to read about it. I think it's very sad that the last living survivor of Titanic died a couple of years ago. She was called Milvina Dean. But she was maybe, I think she was a baby when she was on Titanic, so she was, you couldn't ask her anything. She would not have known. There's some great interviews with people who were children on the ship. I mean, they must have filmed that in like the 80s and 90s. I can't remember the name of the one woman who pops up quite a lot, but if you were to type in Titanic Survivor account on YouTube, again, there is a great interview with her. Very sort of well spoken, but you can imagine that they would have been people from that time. I believe she was a second class passenger. It's the second class passengers that fascinate me. I can't remember, I don't have the facts and figures in terms of inflation, how much it would have been to travel as a first class passenger on Titanic. In today's terms, I mean, you are talking thousands, probably tens of thousands. Very expensive. I think even third class, if you sort of weigh it up, was probably a lot. It's the second class that I find interesting, because even in the movie Titanic, first class and third class get really delved into. Obviously, you know about the splendour and, how pompous those first class passengers were. It was fine clothes and feathers and diamonds. And if you've ever seen my video, Shit Olympia Says, there's a lot of Titanic quotes in that video. I love doing that. I have to do a second one. But one of them is, the whole point of university is to find a suitable husband. Rose has already done that. It's that kind of, like, casual, like, fuckery conversation that those people just, the day-to-day of it. Just so, act like you've got a gold mine and you're in the club, that sort of thing. That's what Molly says. I'm thinking about doing a video inspired by a little bit that I've been doing with Charmaine around the house on a hangover Sunday, where I'll sneak up behind her and I'll make sure she doesn't know that I'm there. And then all of a sudden, that was spot on, by the way. But I just imagine a video where, like, maybe someone's been in an awful car crash and they're lying on the middle of the road, and then I come in slowly off the side of the screen. You can just see me every time. That would be really great. Someone falls flat on their face. I love doing that. Especially when you can frighten Charmaine. You see a lot of the third class. Obviously, you see a lot of the third class stuff in Titanic. Because Leo and Fabrizio... Not Leo. Fool. Jack and Fabrizio win their ticket on Titanic, but they're third class. But it's like a little shitty room with a couple of bunks and maybe a sink or something. But you never see the second class cabins. You never hear about people in the second class. You never hear about you never see what their, accommodation is like, or what they do, or how fancy it is. I think second class was probably, expensive. I think it was probably quite good. There's some reading to be done on that. That's a little pocket of information that I don't really know about. I would love to know if anyone is related to anyone who had been on Titanic. There is my real name, which I'm not going to disclose, but my surname, I've looked it up. There was someone on Titanic with my surname. And that is interesting. I have a very ugly surname. People might even know it. I need to just discuss with Nova if people are aware of our real names. Is that something you say over the internet? Does it matter? I don't know. I'll ask Nova and get back to you. There was someone on Titanic with my surname. He was a member of the crew. I want to say he was a stoker, which if that's... Is that correct? someone who would have been lighting the furnaces down below, who I imagine did not survive due to being right at the bloody bottom. How awful. Those guys looking for Jack and Rose, and they're with the torches, and they're searching the cars in the cargo hold right underneath the ship, and the water just explodes through the side of the hull. Must have been absolutely terrifying. I made a joke when it was on. Me and Falola were there, and that water comes exploding in through the side, and I was like, it's like the condensation at Shah's house. That's not funny. Charmaine won't listen to this, don't worry. She would never have been on Titanic. Someone photoshopped Charmaine onto the back of Titanic the other day, sort of as it's breaking in half. I have a bit of an obsession with it breaking in half. If I'm on a cigarette break or just on a little break somewhere, and I just sort of find myself just wondering what to do on YouTube, if I'm a bit bored, I will watch the clip of it breaking in half. It's so morbid. It really is a morbid fascination that I have. But there's just something about a ship that is so grand and huge, and it's like an otherworldly sort of vessel just breaking in half and sinking like a little paper ship, that like a little paper boat, like that one in the puddle. There's something about it that's ridiculous. The fact that it sank on its maiden voyage, and Britannic sank, I think, after 4 or 5 years. When you consider that these ships took years to build, I believe. Take years. And, can you even imagine how you build a ship of that size? Can you even contemplate how many men must have been involved, the planning, the logistics that go into creating a ship that was that big? And it sank on its maiden voyage. That's what's so fascinating about Titanic, is how ridiculous that whole situation was. I believe did they lose some binoculars? I don't know if this is true now, if it's folklore. Done so much reading, you forget what's true and what's not. I believe the crow's nest, did they lose some binoculars, and that's why perhaps they didn't see it in time. But they ignored the iceberg warnings. It's such a testament to man's arrogance that it was advertised as being unsinkable. I don't know whether or not the White Star Line officially advertised it as being unsinkable, or if that was more of a sort of press thing that got circulated. But why was it considered unsinkable? Just because it was so fancy? I don't know why people were so dense that you could possibly say that. It's sort of, it's flipping the bird to the power of nature. It's ridiculous. But anyway, the fact that it sank on its maiden voyage is so weird. You can't even consider that would have happened. So I don't think they had these binoculars. That was one part of it. When they saw the iceberg, so this is the official theory behind this, they engaged the reverse engine, the reversing, what is the word? The reversing engine. That sounds stupid. They put it in reverse anyway, which slowed it down. They thought if they slowed it down, it would not career into it or into the side of it. The theory is that if they had kept going at the same speed, it would have turned faster, and therefore it would have missed it. Or if they had gone into it directly, it might have fucked up the front of it. But as everyone knows, the Titanic was built to have 5 compartments, if you will, that could have been flooded. The first 5, the ship was segmented into these compartments, and it was allowed to have the first 5 compartments flooded. Is it 4 or was it 5? Forget now. I'm pretty sure it's 5. And there were watertight doors that could have been initiated in order to... I mean, it's horrible to think that there would have been people in those compartments that would have died regardless, but that the first 5 what they call bulkheads could have been flooded, but not 6. And I think that the gash on the side of Titanic went through 6, therefore it was uncontrolled flooding. So I think if it had gone directly into the iceberg, nose first, it might have fucked up 1 or 2 compartments, but it would have been fine. So there's a lot of theory about that. How sound that is, I don't know. It probably is. It's written in a lot of places. There's a lot written about the ships that were nearby. The one in particular that gets mentioned very frequently is the Californian. If you don't know, the Californian was a small, obviously a lot smaller. I think Titanic at the time was the biggest. Titanic and Olympic were the biggest moving vessels in the world. Britannic afterwards, I think Britannic was the last one to be built. It was certainly built after Titanic and Olympic, and I think it may have even been built or finished well after Titanic had sank. So Britannic ended up being the bigger of the 3 because they had to adapt it to fit more lifeboats because, they had realised, that's a stupid idea to not have enough lifeboats on a ship. So Britannic ended up being the biggest ship. But Titanic was obviously much bigger than the Californian, but the Californian was a vessel that was well within sight of Titanic. And I think, either the person responsible for communication, and I think Titanic had pretty good sort of, the Morse code radio technology. The person responsible for manning that on the Californian had either fallen asleep or was drunk, something like that. They saw Titanic in the distance. They saw it emit the flares. Titanic very famously sent up flares, which is a distress signal, but that they brushed that off as they thought Titanic was sort of celebrating, which is just absolutely unbelievable that you would assume that a ship would send up fireworks. That a ship would be so stupid as to send up fireworks, and that people would think, that must be fireworks. It can't be a flare. They're just celebrating its fireworks. Would they even be allowed to do that for fear of tricking people into thinking that they were fireworks? Tricking people into thinking they were flares. It's so daft. So the Californian did nothing to aid Titanic, even though it was supposed to have been the closest vessel. It quite famously ended up being the Carpathia that managed to rescue the lifeboat survivors. The Carpathia is featured in the movie at the end. It was a one smokestack passenger vessel that ended up collecting all the passengers from the lifeboats. But the Carpathia was quite far away. There is a YouTube video. Again, I will recommend this. It's actually pretty hard to watch, but it is a real-time sort of transcript, if you like, of the distress sort of Morse code and communication between the Titanic and the various ships around it, the close ones. It's sort of a transcript of the CQD and like SOS signals that were sent out, where people are talking, and they're saying, Titanic, are you still there? And it's sort of pretty nerve-wracking to watch, because at some point Titanic is going to stop sending these messages, and you sort of think that's it, they're not going to reply now because they're too far gone, and then all of a sudden you'll see another message come back and it'll just be CQD over and over again, which I didn't really know recently what CQD stood for, but they mentioned that in the movie. The captain says to the crew member manning this Morse code, what would you even call that machine? And he says, send a CQD, say we're going down by the head. It stands for come quick distress, which strikes me as strange why people are saying, they were saying, during this transcript, things like, oh, what's going on? We're sort of a bit far away or something. But, if you're going to get sent a come quick distress, only one thing is happening. You are going down to a watery grave. So why you ask questions, why you'd hang around, why more people didn't go there immediately, you would do. It's bizarre. But I suppose, these things happen for a reason, don't they? So people can learn from them, and then the security measures in place are much more stringent after that. The sort of protocol, again, it's very famous, and it is always referenced with Titanic, was that when they were getting on the lifeboats, it was women and children first, which in one of Tina Fey's, is it an autobiography? It's called Bossy Pants. It's a great audiobook to listen to because Tina Fey is obviously hilarious. There is an excerpt in this about an ocean liner that she was on where there was a ship fire. And she said that there was a fire, was it in the kitchen, or that there was a part where they were told to proceed to their muster station, which must be a sort of, I've never actually been on an ocean liner, so what a muster station is, I'm not entirely sure. It must be something that you are told, similarly to when you go on an airplane, you're outlined the safety procedures. It must be something you're told when you get onto a ship, an area that you are to proceed to in the event of an emergency. And she's told to proceed to this. She said that the captain comes on the radio, and that the captain says, bravo, bravo, bravo. And that the number of times that a crew member will say bravo, over like a loudspeaker system, determines how serious the situation is. The 4 times is the worst. So she said the fact that the captain, whoever it was, said bravo, bravo, bravo was not amazing. If the captain says it 4 times, you got to get the fuck off that ship because it is going down. Whether or not that was a newer thing, or I don't know. Whether or not they would have said that on Titanic, I don't know. But the point was with this story is that she said that the women and children protocol, even then, was still in place. It's still a thing, apparently. Maybe it will differ depending on what ocean liner, company you're on, or whether or not those sort of rules are universal. Whether there's something to do with like international waters or international sort of maritime code where that still happens. I don't know. I've never been on a ship. Would I go on a ship? I feel like if I did go on a cruise, I would spend the majority of the time walking around studying it to figure out if it sank, where would I go? What I don't think I would be able to go on a cruise and not spend the entire time thinking about Titanic and sort of placing yourself in different scenarios and really analysing it. I do that. I do analyse things a lot. I think it's why I am, I'm just so sharp. I'm so witty. I really am. Quite funny. It's because I memorise things and I really analyse things, and I've always got things going on in my head. So, that is... I've never considered going on a cruise. Tina Fey did mention something about the fact that she thought that cruises were just an alternative for people who didn't like flying. Unfortunately, modes of transportation are, can be quite terrifying. All of them can be. You are moving, so shit might go down. But that was her theory. But people do love going on cruises. I don't really like the idea of being constantly in a confined space with potentially, families. Families are awful. That's just the way that is. Titanic's shipwreck is fascinating to observe. It is obviously at the bottom of the North Atlantic. It is how many miles down? About 4, something like that. I might have just made that up. It is in 2 pieces. It is very submerged in the mud, the soil, on the seabed. Dr. Robert Ballard said that the soil is anoxic, I think was the word, meaning that there is no oxygen there. And therefore he believes that the part of Titanic's bow and I guess subversely, the stern that is submerged in that soil would still have the fresh paint on it, because there is no reason why that would rust off, because there is no oxygen. He said when Titanic sank, it had been a ship for 4 days. So the paint that is submerged in that is like essentially 4-day-old paint. It should be as fresh as a daisy. He goes on to say that there is a technology, there is a kind of paint that has been developed that is a kind of paint that can be put onto surfaces underwater, and it is protective. So he wishes to paint it. He wants to be able to paint it, I think he said, ideally the same colour, like a rust colour, so it looks the same, but, like an anoxic paint. I don't even know if that's the word, that would therefore preserve it from any more decay. Because I think the idea is, I don't know how long it's got left, but eventually it would just collapse onto the ocean floor and just be a big pile of shit. It's already pretty bad. The stern, funnily enough, is the opposite direction to the bow. So if you think about the front of the ship is sort of facing forward, the stern is a fair distance away from it, but it's facing the other way because it's spiraled on its way down. Britannic is the opposite. It's in one whole piece and it's lying on it just neatly on its side. I don't know if the funnels are there. The way that I think Dr. Ballard said in this, and listen to it if you've got any interest, but he said that when they were, it was like there were some French people who were also looking for Titanic, and it came down to a very small window. If he was going to look for it, he was going to look for it. And there was a very small window of opportunity where he could find Titanic, because obviously that wasn't the primary objective. But he said, right, let's think about this logically. There is obviously a last noted nautical location that Titanic would have given for where it was. There would have been a rough area, but we're talking about miles and miles, and having to scour the seabed for miles and miles. It's like, needle in a haystack situation. So they had a rough idea. But Dr. Ballard approached it from the idea that if he got the exact location from where the lifeboats were picked up with the survivors in it, because obviously Titanic sank at an exact location, but travelling miles downward, it would have moved a long way. And if it was broken in 2 pieces, they didn't know if they were together or what had happened. So Dr. Ballard said that if me and Dr. Ballard, great friends, sounds weird me saying his name, but whatever. He said that if he had the exact location for where the lifeboats were picked up with the survivors, that he would be able to go backwards from that location in a certain direction and hopefully stumble across a debris field. He said that the French had really sort of located a rough area, had started going, and that they were like mowing a lawn, going backwards and forwards to try and find it, but that they started about 200 metres away from it and went off in the wrong direction and spent the entire search going off in the wrong direction. But they started 200 metres away from it. I mean, how unlucky is that they were basically on it? But you would think if you were that close, you would see debris. I mean, the amount of stuff that came out of that ship, boilers and panelling and, artefacts. There's a lot of stuff on the ocean floor. One of the saddest things he said was that there are a lot of shoes on the ocean floor because of the way that the leathers at the time were created and like tanned or whatever, that they would not break down. So you can see sort of pairs of shoes on the ocean floor, even sometimes like sort of 2 people, like an adult pair of shoes, and then like just next to it like a little tiny pair where it had been like a child and parent. It is essentially a grave. It is a landmark, but it is a grave. It is funny to me that there's so much trash there. He said that given that it was discovered, 40 years ago now, maybe a bit more, is that right, 43, whatever, that there have been so many people to visit the Titanic shipwreck that I don't know whether or not they intended to, or if it just happened to be what happened, because going down to a depth that deep obviously has a great set of issues, and it's logistically probably a nightmare. But there is a lot of debris that was left on the shipwreck. Ropes and nets or whatever. There's a lot of shit there that wasn't there before. And it just seems irritating that people have left garbage on a sort of, people's final resting place, essentially. It does make you wonder, would I go and see the shipwreck? Apparently it costs tens of thousands if you want to go in a submarine to see Titanic. I don't know if I would have the nerve to be in a submarine, which is presumably very small, at the bottom of the ocean. I don't think I'm great at flying. It's the same thing. That's probably worse because you're up in the air. Who even knows? I'm not great at that sort of thing, so I don't think I'd be able to do that. But it is fascinating to watch. You've got to love that movie for the way that they've set up that there is a modern day story occurring as well as the timeline as it was happening. That is such a great premise, and it jumps backwards and forwards. You sort of think that Kate Winslet looked nothing like Gloria Stewart, who played the elderly Rose. But there is that one shot where Rose is being drawn by Jack, just the necklace. And there's a shot of Rose's eye, young Rose, and then it sort of merges into the modern day elderly Rose's eye. And it's the same eye. So how they achieve that, that's fascinating to me. Do eyes just look the same? No, they don't. So, who knows? But I don't think I'd be able to go down there. Maybe Britannic I could see, because it is, a lot shallower. The White Star Line does not exist anymore. It was bought, I think, by Cunard. You can only assume that the White Star Line folded and went under, because to have spent that much money on 3 ocean liners, 2 of which were gone in about the same amount of time as it took to build them, and then the other one was scrapped after not even that long, 20 years maybe. Is 20 years a good amount of service for a ship? That seems terrible. It's probably more work will go into building a ship than it would a building, and buildings last for centuries, or, thereabouts. So the fact that a ship would, 20 years is considered good. I mean, they just riddled with disasters, this company, the White Star Line. There is, and this is fascinating, there is one White Star Line vessel that is still afloat. It is called the Nomadic, and it is a tiny, tiny ship, and it's permanently docked. It doesn't go anywhere. But I think it's in France, and it serves as a museum ship. I think it's probably primarily got Titanic stuff on it, but it is a tiny museum ship, and it looks fascinating. I'd love to go. They have repainted it in the same sort of livery as it would have had in the day. White Star Line ships, they have a very sort of famous, distinguishable look about them, with the black, with the white line, with the red right underneath, and the smokestack's got the sort of little bit of, it's yellow with the black at the top. They're very sort of recognisable, but that's still there. But that's fascinating to read that one. But there's no more. The White Star Line, what is it? The White Star Line buildings are still there. The original sort of buildings. Are they in Ireland? I think they're still there, and they still have some White Star Line sort of symbolism around the place, tiling or what have you. But I suppose when you weigh it up, that was more than 100 years ago. That was a very fucking long time ago. What I think is precious is that there is some sort of first-class service that these ocean liners provide. The new ones, whatever company it is, I'm pretty sure it's Cunard that bought out the White Star Line. I think maybe it was called something else for a while, but I think essentially now, whichever company it is, they provide a service, and it's called the White Star Service as sort of an homage to that. But you might just, it is nice would you not spend the whole time thinking, oh, that sort of seems tainted, or, you know, I'd feel uneasy about that, because the White Star Line does not have anything happy associated with it at all, really. It's so tainted. There is a Chinese gentleman, I believe, who has funded the building of a Titanic 2, which is a replica. It's exactly the same. It's supposed to be to scale. I mean, how fascinating. You'd go. Would you want to sail on it? I can't imagine that would be a good idea. Do people want this ship to be built? It's a hard thing. It's a fine line, because, yes, from the point of view that you want to go and see, who doesn't want to see that? Who doesn't want to go on Titanic? You would give your right arm to go and look around Titanic. But at the same time, is that not just horribly distasteful? Possibly, I don't know. I'd be interested to see it. I do not believe that Titanic 2, the movie Titanic 2, should ever have been rendered. They should have left that in Final Cut. They should have got to the end of it and thought, we have made a golden turd of a movie. How dare we create this piece of shit? It's a very low budget movie. If you've never heard of it, never seen it. It was on Sci-Fi, which is that network. It's spelled like SYFY. I think that network plays like Sharknado and all that garbage. And it's primarily got like porn stars in it. You know, like porn stars that like want to be an actor, but they've fallen into porn because they've got to pay the rent. And then they end up in Titanic 2. Absolute disaster. Oh, yeah, don't watch that. Just go back and watch Titanic again. What is your favourite moment in Titanic? Is it when Rose is on the floating door and Jack can't get on it? Now, listen. We've all thought it. Everyone's thought it. Everyone has been talking about this. It's reverberated around the internet for as long as the internet has been a thing, and Titanic, the movie, has been a thing. Could Jack have fit on the floating door? Which, by the way, I don't even think it was a door. I'm pretty sure it was some sort of wood panelling. Could he have? Yes, probably. You know, logistically, if she had jimmied over and he got on, that's fine. Maybe they would have both fit. Would they both have fit? You know, people have done this. They've sketched, like, taped out the shape and fit two people in the space. That's fine. But have you done it on water? I think the theory is that, sure, maybe they both could have fit in a certain Tetris type way, but would they have both fit so that the door would not have submerged slightly because of the weight, rendering it pointless, because to be submerged in that much water, you would have frozen anyway? I don't know about that. Who cares? Is it completely within Jack's character to just be like, you know what, fuck it, so long as she's okay, that's fine? Yes. So, no one cares they both could have fit on it. It doesn't matter. Even if they could have done, you might have assumed that Jack would have just done that anyway, because he wanted to make sure that she was, you know, precious and fine. And that he didn't care about himself, he just cared about Rose. Another deleted scene, there's actually an alternative ending, which is, Falola put it quite well. She's glad that they didn't go with this ending. She doesn't prefer this ending, which is quite right. But it is very interesting to see. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's when old Rose goes to throw the heart of the ocean into the sea. I would say spoiler alert, but that seems a bit ridiculous. So she goes to throw the heart of the ocean into the sea. But Brock and her niece... Is it niece or granddaughter? No, it's granddaughter. The bird who plays Old Rose's granddaughter was actually married to James Cameron at the time, I believe. That's his wife. But she's going to throw the necklace in, and they both see her doing this, and they run down to tell her to stop. And then he's like, "What, you had it all along, you crafty bitch?" And he holds it very briefly, and he just wants to hold it in his hand, and then she throws it into the sea anyway. But there is that deleted scene. Glad they didn't go with it. I think James Cameron has since gone on record by saying that he thought that scene was ghastly and can't believe that he even shot that ending, you know, that it was so naff. There's also an alternative ending when it doesn't even hit the iceberg. It just goes right round it and they get to New York. But I think that probably didn't go down well with people. They thought we can save an absolute bundle here if we don't film the sinking. Get it to New York. Just get it there. Maybe people won't notice. They'll think it was a different boat. I don't even know anymore. So fascinating. I wonder what I'm going to talk about next. I had a certain, urge the other day. I've been doing a lot of reading recently. It just sort of pops up, doesn't it? When you're sort of on Facebook or whatever, and occasionally you'll see a website for lists, 10 facts about something you didn't know. Number 3 will make you shit. I've mentioned that before. I hate those things. But, Titanic comes up, time and time again. And so I just did some reading, and I thought, I tweeted, and I said, God, I'm just going to have to do this. I don't know why it's never occurred to me to talk about Titanic before, because I am absolutely obsessed with it. My friend Al, we grew up together. He lived down the road. We're the same age. We've known each other 20-something years at least. He used to tell people that I was really obsessed with Titanic. And I used to get really embarrassed. And I'd say to people, what are you talking? What? I don't know what you're talking about. Because teenage boys are not supposed to be interested in that sort of thing. They should like rugged things. What are people like? Rocks and things. I imagine. What are boys like? I don't know. Not like other boys. But there will always be an interest in this topic. There will always be facts and, debate and conjecture and folklore. The folklore surrounding it that people invented that there was a mummy in the cargo hold. Where did that come from? That it was transporting a mummy, a cursed mummy, and that's why it sank. Where did that come from? That's fascinating. That there was an author who wrote a book 10 years prior to Titanic sinking called the Titan, or I don't know what it was called, but it was about a ship called Titan, and it sank on its maiden voyage. What is that? What the hell is that? How can you do that? That's bizarre. That there was a woman on Titanic, and this is recounted by a survivor who said that her mother was a very stoic, very no-nonsense woman. She was very straight-laced. She didn't take any bullshit. She would not entertain the idea of ghosts or anything like that. But that very uncharacteristically, and this survivor was a child at the time, on Titanic with her mother, she said very uncharacteristically, for some reason, her mother stayed up all night, the night of the sinking, wearing a lifeboat because she thought something terrible was going to happen. Didn't go to sleep, left the lights on, and just sat there in a life jacket. I mean, that is super weird. I think it's because it's such a weird situation. There really are so many factors about it that make it such a fascinating story. It is just so endlessly tragic. It's really, I could talk about this for hours. Honestly, I could. If anyone would like to enter into a discussion with me about this, about any part of it, let's talk. Let's do a Skype session. Let me know. Write something in the comments, please. If there's any other shipwrecks that are interesting, I think I've named all the ones that I found really interesting. I love the movie Ghost Ship. Completely different. It's camp as you like. It's a horror movie. It did not perform very well at the box office. It probably has a cult following because of the opening scene. If you've sort of vaguely remember it but don't really know what it is. The opening scene of the movie Ghost Ship is the one where it's in the 50s. It's an Italian ocean liner. There's people dancing on the deck, and there's a very taut wire that snaps, and it gets shot through this group of people dancing, and they all get cut in half. It is the most famous scene from this movie by far. It is. I think there are sort of horror movie websites and stuff that have listed this as being, one of the most famous horror movie scenes of all time. That's a great movie because there's something about a sunken ship, especially a ghost ship. Ghost ships are fascinating. There's that one, oh God, what is the name of the one? It's going to drive me mad. I'll never remember the name of it. All you need to do is find a BuzzFeed article about ghost ships. The one that, there's a lot. Obviously, there are, going back to the Mary Celeste or the Flying Dutchman, those kind of really ancient ships. Ancient's not the word, but those wooden ships. All the way right through to recent times. But it's ones where a ship will just be found just drifting gently towards the shore, and there'll be, personal items on the ship or the boat, and there'll be like a laptop open and stuff, but the crew are just gone. There's no blood, there's no nothing. What happened? Stuff like that. The ship is still there. It didn't sink. Where are these people? If they were taken by pirates, you would assume that they would also want to take the ship. That's the whole point, isn't it, of a pirate, is to commandeer a ship. So, I don't, where, we'll never know. We will just never know some of these boat stories. We'll just have no idea. But you absolutely have to go and look up the one about, the one with the rats on it, because that one is fascinating. Look up the Oceanos, look up the Costa Concordia. These are, they're not unknown. A lot of people, if you're listening to this, you may well have an interest in this anyway. You might not give a shit about ships. You might just be like, I don't give a flying fuck about it, and stop talking at me now. I'm going to go. I'm going to go. But I'm just giving you the option. If you're not interested in ships, do some reading, because they are fascinating. I find it very strange. If you look at our YouTube, like our actual YouTube history as viewed from our account, which you won't have access to, please don't try and hack into it. But for example, on our TV downstairs, we've got YouTube open. You look at our search history, it is hilarious, because it will be a 50-50 mix of like Nova's looked up like Britney Spears choreography, like Todrick Hall, shit like that. And then it'll be like sinking of the Oceanos. It'll just be like shipwreck searches, stuff like that. It is fascinating. I'm sure I'm going to finish this, and I'll go downstairs and I'll open the Titanic Wikipedia page, which might as well be my homepage, let's be honest, and I will find a whole bunch of stuff that I've not spoken about. Maybe I'll listen back to this, make some notes, and do like a sequel episode. I'll call it Titanic 2. I bought a Titanic builder model, like one of those little model building sets. Only a small one, and I built it very quickly, very badly. It's a piece of shit. I don't even know why I still have it. I did a really shit job on it. But I have a blue hair, and I wanted to wear it as like a headdress. And then I sort of wrapped some hair around the front of it, and it looked like it was sinking, and Nova was like, I do not like where you are going with this. Very creative, but very tasteless. Take that off your head right now. I'd lost myself in like a little Titanic sort of moment. I didn't know what was happening. That is tasteless. I might do it though. No, you can't. Nova's probably in the other room listening right now. Anyway, I'll call it a day, guys. Oh, thank you for joining though. What I was going to tease, I will tease. This is the first time I'm going to tease this. Nova might not listen to this podcast. She might not have any idea that I'm going to do this. But there is a big event happening within the Novympia channel. Something very exciting is happening to the Novympia channel. And that will be sometime, hopefully, in July. As I'm recording this, it's right at the end of April. Next week, we are flying to California for RuPaul's DragCon in LA. So if you are listening to this now, between now and the weekend of the 12th of May, if you're going to DragCon, oh my God, come up to me and let's talk about Titanic. Let's just have a little moment, because we'll be there all day. Let's have a chit chat. I'd love that so much. But yes, what I'm teasing is that there will be something happening to the Novympia channel probably in July that we're very excited about. It's going to be very big. We have been hoping this would happen maybe for us for a long time, and we are going to run with it, and I'm very excited. So I hope that people will maybe listen to that and sort of maybe open up a discussion of what's going to happen. Oh my God. Listen, if you're going to be at DragCon, please say hello. We don't bite. I love talking to people about shit that's happened on our channel. That would be really exciting. If you're listening to this and you have not subscribed to our channel yet, for God's sake, make an account and subscribe. Could you not be so lazy, please? I don't appreciate that. I really don't. Go make an account and subscribe, please. Find our social media. We were just featured on Trixie Mattel's Instagram page. Find our Instagram. It's in the description below. It really is. Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I'd love to talk to people about Titanic. If you've got any interesting information, throw it my way. I'd love to open up a dialogue about this. That's great. Thanks for coming, you guys. This has been full of shit.